Here's the premise of the book, what's behind it all, and that is we need to think through our strategy. We need to think strategically, but then we also have to execute. We got to bring those ideas of a new market or maybe a new product or a new competitive place on a pricing model, and really important to think about the world through the eyes of strategy. But then the roadmap that we've laid out, a 6-step roadmap, also adds on the notion that to then think through the strategy and execute the strategy, there are 6 vital steps to do so. That's why we call the volume the Strategic Leader's Roadmap. And just to briefly touch on the titles for them, we'll elaborate as we talk this through. The first is to integrate strategy and leadership, as opposed to looking at those as 2 separate disciplines or topics, to make certain that they're integrally connected. Number 2, we all need then to lead strategically. That is, we got to keep the strategy and the vision behind it well in mind. And then we got to look around corners. We have to understand how markets are changing. That's all part of leading strategically. Number 3, we need to have a good strategic fit. And to illustrate that more graphically with an illustration we have in the book, we took a look at the replacement of a chief executive officer with 3 possible internal candidates coming up for review by the board. The board took a very hard look at the 3, and initially one of the 3 emerged as the leading candidate, all insiders, to replace the chief executive. But through several very discerning steps, the directors asked for more information on the 3 and concluded that actually the dark horse, the least known of the 3 people who were under consideration, the youngest by far, that he, all 3 were very good, but he, the third person, would better fit the strategy going forward. So ensuring strategic fit means that we've got the right people in the high offices then to execute the strategy. Number 4 is convey strategic intent. Basic idea there is that we want eyes on but hands off. So we are going to delegate, we're going to make clear what our strategy should be, and the intent, the general intent on how to carry it out. But then since we have presumably hired great people who know a lot about how strategy works and how to execute it, we give them a lot of authority to indeed bring that plan into reality. And the way we sum that up, that number 4 point, is convey strategic intent. Learn to say what you want clearly, precisely, without micromanaging in the same sentence. Number 5 is to layer leadership. Think about leadership above you, at your level, and below you. And the 3 layers, that's why we call it layer your leadership, all vital in their own way to take the strategy and bring it into reality. So layering leadership connotes, among other things, an ability to work with people above you, helping them execute their leadership, to work with people below you to get them in a place to execute at their level, and of course at your own. And then finally, number 6, we do need to decide deliberatively, which means in essence, we got to think about how to make decisions. We got to look at some of the pitfalls in making decisions. We can't rush to judgment. We have to think deliberatively and decide deliberatively.
In this book, we're trying to look at strategy and leadership in an integrated fashion. A lot of books on leadership have the inspirational element really in high relief, and then books on strategy are very analytical. And so, for example, if you take our some of our bullet points like layering leadership, they really talk about both. It talks about a strategic direction, but also building leadership throughout the organization. So one of the points we make is that all levels of the organization own parts of the strategy, and that's really what we're trying to convey in this book as a whole.
In writing the new version, Harbir and I spent a good bit of time not only thinking about the changes, but actually talking with people who are in the middle of the changes out there. I'm going to single out two. Harbir may add one or two as well. Number one, this is a commonplace, we all know it, that change seems to have a shorter cycle time to it. Uh, Customers seem sometimes more ephemeral. Technology seem to be more rapidly turning over. And thus, one of the biggest changes, or one of the biggest sort of developments out there in the world that companies operate in, is the need for these 6 elements to be addressed more quickly and more agilely. And then the second change I'm going to stress reflects I believe we believe some of the changes in the workforce, where people at all levels want to be more involved in setting the priorities for the company, in helping the priorities be achieved once they know where you want to take them as a leader of them. And thus, it's become more important to not only hand down strategic imperatives from the top where you are, but also to hear what people on the front lines are thinking, what it's going to take them to implement. And thus, there's a bigger premium now on those lower layers to make certain that once you've got your strategy, you can execute it.
One of the things we added in this particular edition, after doing research on the current environment, was the importance of resilience. With the COVID pandemic and all the stresses in organizations, it turns out that the 6 steps work really well together. In particular, the idea of layering leadership and for people to respond, to pivot and craft the new solution quickly. So that was one of the things that happened in the run-up to the current edition. Another was, it became clearer that when we look at our graduates and millennials and others, that purpose has become very, very important. When people choose where they want to work, they actually, or look for employment, they also want to see purpose in their roles. And some of the stories that we have in the book on Pepsi and the introduction of performance with purpose, where the CEO Indra Nui balanced, making the products more healthful with the idea of profit. And purpose was partly to create better products, but also environmental sustainability and so on. And since then, I think today, the majority of the Fortune 100 are pursuing performance with purpose. So this is one of the elements that we have emphasized in the book. So a company that we feature in the book that doesn't get that much attention, but actually outperformed the Standard & Poor's index for 25 years in a row, is Danaher. And we feature Danaher as an example of a company that follows all the 6 steps. Larry Culp, when he was named CEO, very much emphasized the integration of strategy and leadership, the first point. And in that, it was a combination of market leadership, but also a US-based version of continuous improvement, and for people to lead in improvement all through the organization. So that was an integration of strategy and leadership in the first step. In the second step, on the value proposition, Danaher grew in sort of the intermediate industries, not the most high-tech and not the least high-tech, but industries which had profit potential but were not always covered heavily in the magazines about the cool industries like test and measuring equipment and other such differentiated technological products. And they chose companies whom they used in their growth platform that had market position but had potential for coming to number 1. So one of the things that Danaher did was to build an internal process that allows companies to use some tools within the parent firm that helps them grow to a higher level. A third one was really strategic intent, and here they had a process by which each business unit gave kind of a vision of their business, and there was a cascading of that vision through the organization through particular initiatives that the parent firm Danaher was doing, and Larry Culp encouraged the units to follow that as well. So that was really the idea of conveying strategic intent. In the area of layering leadership, very interestingly, Danaher built the Danaher business system, which consisted of more than 50 different training programs within the company, and also menu-driven tools that people could use in areas such as supply chain, quality improvement, but also leadership development at the middle and junior levels. And the last one was decided deliberately. In this one, Danaher instituted a process where there was a very deliberate policy deployment process converting long-term conceptual goals into very concrete performance goals, which were owned by various levels in the organization. So Danaher is an exceptionally good example of using the 6 steps that we talk about in the book.
And I would add, by way of a very different example, getting at the underlying roadmap yet again, of a person who rose up through the financial ranks at ITT. So she had an MBA degree from University of Chicago in finance, became chief financial officer of a company. And as she rose up through the ranks and became chief financial officer, she began to tell herself that I really ought to be thinking about not just the financial accounting and the treasury function. I really ought to be thinking about the company's overall strategy. Does it fit the marketplace? Are we investing in areas that are going to expand us in the marketplace? Denise Ramos, at a point when ITT was about to split into 3 new independent companies, so one company now breaking into 3 standalone spin-offs, needed 3 chief executives. The board chair of ITT turned to her and said, Denise, we'd like you to become the CEO, the chief executive officer of one of these 3 spin-offs. And she said, look, I'm in finance. Why have you picked me? And the quote that really kind of sums up a lot that's in this book is, said the board chair in response, because Denise, you're already thinking like a CEO before you have become a CEO. And what that meant, of course, is that she was thinking about marketing and pricing and accounting and management and working with the board and working with the investment market. And she took the job, by the way. She became chief executive as a forward-thinking strategic leader, the very theme of this book. And under her leadership, she stepped down now, but under her leadership until recently, the company prospered because, indeed, she didn't explicitly think, of course, of our roadmap, but she was deciding deliberatively. She was thinking about how strategy and her own execution of it has to go hand in hand. Sometimes, if one of those 6 steps is missing, companies and those who lead companies can get themselves in some trouble. And thus we say it's a complete roadmap, and you need all 6 steps on it to survive and to prosper.
If we start with Jack Ma, the most interesting thing is that Jack Ma had founded and built the most successful company to go to IPO in the US market, but from China. And that was in basically online commerce. And yet Jack Ma's degree, education was in English language. So here's somebody who really had more of an intuitive feel for how to build a business and also a real understanding of the consumer. And so just to sort of walk through some critical incidents in his history. So in 1995, when he was visiting the US from China, one of his friends got him on the internet, and they looked at beers from China, from what that were available. There was no Chinese beer. So he went back to China and felt that we have to have Chinese products online that can actually be available beyond Chinese markets, but even within China. And so he created a model where where people could put their catalogs online. So that was the beginning, but he hired the best programmers to do that. So the layering leadership idea was already there. The big thing he did to compete with eBay and beat eBay was that he understood the Chinese consumer a lot better. And specifically what he did, eBay was more than 10 times the size of Alibaba's Taobao, the unit that was competing. What they did was they created a model where the consumer would inspect the goods before paying for them, because Chinese consumers did not like the idea of online commerce and were afraid of being cheated, and also gave them kind of an option to negotiate in some sense, to place a bid in exchange for while they were looking at the recommended price. And that piece of software that allowed people to escrow the goods and negotiate kind of differentiated this product, whereas eBay was mostly a US model taken to China. So that differentiation helped him a lot. And then he was running short of money. He managed to convince the CEO of Yahoo to put $1 billion into Alibaba, and they dropped the transaction fee to zero. So they managed to fund their software. So that was again a brilliant move. I would say that what made Jack Ma different was that he was always consumer oriented, so the value proposition was very important. Layering leadership in terms of technological skill and building leaders for each product line. The ability to pivot was another one, the flexibility. And then deciding deliberately. Any major decision was made with multiple levels in the organization, but once they decided, they went for it. And there were several make or break decisions in the history of Alibaba, and they could have failed at any one of them. Pepsi is a very interesting and different case. Indra Nooyi came in as CFO, so she was a technocrat, a foreign-born technocrat running a basically classic consumer product company. And when she came in, she realized that it was not necessarily sustainable because of the amount of salt and additives in the snacks. So she actually announced a program of performance with purpose in the first year, and said that we cannot just produce profit, we also have to look at healthier choices and also think about the environment when you think of bottling. So when she began to do that, there was almost a revolt in the company, and she managed to quell that revolt by essentially asking people whether they would consume these products all the time rather than just occasionally. And as a result, the company began to focus more on innovation. So the idea of being long-term is very much in her account of her leadership, the idea of vision, the idea of strategic intent, and then also the idea of making hard choices, the idea of initiatives prompted Pepsi to go in a different direction than Coke. And for a while, they were penalized by the stock market for that. In the long run, the idea of building all these managers who were globally oriented, but also had ownership of different parts of the mission, made Pepsi highly successful. And the performance with purpose that started in 2006, now more than 50% of the S&P 500 executives explicitly subscribe to performance with purpose. And the basic idea is you cannot have performance without purpose because people won't be motivated. And you cannot have purpose without performance because you can't fund the things that are necessary, such as the environmental initiatives that Pepsi takes. So really very, very interesting to see someone take bold decisions. And in both cases, Jack Ma and Indra Nooyi took decisions that in the short run could very well have made their 10 years unsuccessful, but they were doing it for the long run success.
So here are two connected points that sum up to one, and that is, I think we all need a roadmap. If we are really good at deciding deliberatively, but we don't have the other features, if we've got a great strategy and we can lead it, but we don't layer leadership in the sense of having leaders at all levels, we can be great at 1, 2, or even 4 or 5 of these. But in our experience in talking with many people, it looks like we need all 6 of these particular points that constitute the leader's roadmap. And the second point I would make that's very closely related, I think we understand and appreciate and remember in some indelible way the 6 steps of the roadmap by seeing them embodied in people like John Chambers of Cisco, who we profile in the book, or Jack Ma of Alibaba, who we profile in the book, or Larry Culp of Danaher. Harbir and I have become convinced partly from teaching, partly from writing for various audiences on this, that we need to offer up the concepts, in this case, a 6-stage strategic leaders roadmap with rich examples told in some detail where we can actually see them carrying out each of those 6.
This book really tries to talk about, does I think as much as it can, to talk about how to move the needle in an organization. Many articles on or books on leadership or strategy are in the more abstract realm. Moving the needle is what seems to be left out very often. And what we've done is in the 6 steps, we have blended strategy and leadership. The inspirational piece, the motivational piece, which would come under leadership, with the analytical piece and the market-facing piece that comes from strategy. So that's one of the critical points. And what John Chambers did, he failed in an earlier part of his career with Wang. I should say the company he worked with failed. And he was part of the difficulties coming from not keeping up with technology. And he had to then, when he came to Cisco, he promised himself that we will not let that happen again. So his value proposition in the 6 steps was, we must source technology if we don't have it internally. And the other point that's unusual in this book, which I think people really can see, is how to develop as a leader yourself. Not everybody's reading this as a CEO. People are reading this in early parts of their careers. And the section on layering leadership, I think, is really, really important. And specifically in that, we talk about Apple and how autocorrect came about. And it turns out a lot of it was leadership in the middle to senior levels in the organization and building algorithms. So layering leadership, I think, is an important way in which we move the needle when we execute on strategy.